Disability services in New Haven County Public Schools has improved over the years through parents and advocates like nonprofits raising awareness for children with special needs. Quinnipiac University professor, administrative director of the Honors Program, and chair of the Hampden Board of Education, Melissa Kaplan, is a strong ally for students in need of special education.
I think that going forward, any plans that the Hampden School District has to make sure that we support our most vulnerable students, and they really need to be the forefront of any conversation that we have. Being a parent of a child who has diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety, I approach this from both a Board of Ed member but also a parent, and I see in terms of him going through the system and my own concerns and making sure that students like my son are cared for and recognized and valued and not underestimated how brilliant these students are. And I think that's also sometimes an issue as well. Just because you think a little differently, you work around problems a little differently, doesn't mean that you aren't absolutely brilliant. We need to have an entire network to support our students, particularly our most vulnerable students, like our neurodivergent students.
Like Kaplan, Quinnipiac student teachers have also been assisting students in their classes who require extra attention. Graduate student Erin Jones, who works at Pond Hill School in Wallingford, Connecticut, spoke of her experience working with students over the last 2 years.
The one student who came from a different school where he was labeled as a behavior issue, but he's not. Like, he very clearly has autism, and that set him back a lot. Like, he wasn't receiving the services he needed, which was unfortunate, and he was in an isolation class, so he was only with 3 other students, and they were more behavioral, so that presented with a lot of challenges too. Like, he experienced some bullying, didn't receive the proper academic services, so when he came to us in November, he was probably at like a kindergarten, first grade academic level, especially in reading. He's moved up to like mid-second grade level now in just the few months that he's been with us, which has like been great growth. We have another student who like came from isolation and can't socially like interact with the other kids, has had a lot of issues, and there's some instances where he does things that are inappropriate but doesn't know because no one's telling him that. So I think that's kind of frustrating, and it's unfortunate for the child because he's losing out, you know.
Undergraduate student Natasha Hoffner, who works at the K-8 Fairhaven School in New Haven, Connecticut, has had similar experiences to that of Jones.
Last semester when I was in another classroom, there was basically an entire classroom that was like filled with students that were either undiagnosed disability or they ended up having one, and a lot of the paraprofessionals had to come in and like assist with them most of the time. There were instances where there were like students that their para wasn't there in the morning and they had to come in later during like my time there, and they would just act out. There was a student who like sharpened his pencil and would like throw it at the teacher, or like he got a little physical. And there were other ones that just were like distractions to other students. But when the para came, usually it was much easier, but before that, the classroom was like really disruptive.
A question on the minds of disability services advocates is whether the town budget is being fairly allocated to students in need.
It is a very complex system of support, but it also is the largest portion of the town's Board of Ed budget is for our special ed students. We spend a lot more money when we cannot provide services to students and we have to outplace them. And that also is much harder on families when we can't provide those services in town. So one of our long-term goals is making sure that we keep those students in town to provide them with those services. And it's also economically smart to do so. To me, it's a win-win when we're able to do things like that.
But I feel like at my school, I think it is like the students that need it receive the proper services and go through testing. But at other schools during like my field study, where I feel like it probably wasn't allocated fairly, like that students needed the services and they weren't receiving them. So like I don't know all the specifics of the budget and everything, but I've seen it been allocated unfairly at other schools, I feel.
It's being addressed, but some of the students I think need a little bit more help than like they're being given. And I do think specifically within like the area that I'm placed for my like field study program, there are a higher like amount of kids that would necessarily qualify for special education, or at least would need like assisted services just for like behavioral issues or something like that. So I think there's always room for like, progress, but I think they're doing the most that they can with what they're given.
Accommodations provided by the public schools for students usually include IEPs or 504 plans.
Legally, we have to make sure that we are able to meet the needs of every single student who has an IEP or a 504 plan. That's legally mandated. We are obligated to make sure that those students are taken care of, not just in our school, but actually the entire town. So even if students choose not to go to the Hampton Public Schools, we are still responsible, even in their other schools, to provide services like testing and other types of resources available to those students. So we're talking about thousands upon thousands of students, and this is from kindergarten all the way until 12th grade, and we even have programs post high school graduation in which we continue to support students. So we have parents of special education students that have come together because they felt that their voices weren't being heard, and out of a desire to advocate for their students, created a PTA, and they've done amazing work in fundraising, in bringing community together, of raising awareness, and I owe so much to the special education PTA. These parents have been instrumental, and so anytime that the Board of Ed has any kind of conversation regarding our special ed students, I make sure that they're part of the conversation. We need to hear their voices. It allows us to better serve the community when we do.
We have the de-escalation strategies will vary. We really only need them for the two students, the one who is diagnosed with autism, the one who we believe is and came from isolation. We found like certain things that work is like maybe talking to them, removing them from the situation, going on a walk, using certain like cues or phrases that they know, like, is this something that needs to be said in your head or does it need to come out of your mouth? And they can kind of self-regulate that way, and that helps teach them those strategies too, because those are skills that they need to learn. So it works on both ends. It helps us de-escalate and it helps them learn the proper way to manage those feelings. So it just depends on each child. What works for them is going to be different than what works for another student. So it's all about getting to know the child and then what is going to work for them.
I know that they have IEPs and like special education programs for them. So IEPs, individualized education programs. And I know they work a lot alongside the parents in order to like really make sure that they're the best fitted form of accommodations for the students, and they definitely have like social workers, counselors, and also a lot of like paraprofessionals, or a decent amount at hand that can help the students, and usually the teachers are like of the utmost like help for the students.
New Haven County Public Schools continue to implement strategies to aid students in need of specialized education, but there is always room for innovative ideas to raise awareness and break the stigma toward people with disabilities.